Welcome to Drive Time Dystopia, where the future is broken, the system is watching, and survival always comes at a cost. Here you'll find dystopian worlds, fractured societies, impossible choices, and the people forced to endure them. So settle in, keep your eyes on the road if you're driving, and step into the dark. Your story begins now.
The Choir under Pripyat. By 2034, Pripyat had become a place people talked about in two incompatible ways. In scientific circles, it was a grim, long-term experiment. One of the most contaminated human landscapes ever created. A monument to fallout, displacement, mutation, ecological resilience, and the stubbornness of biological systems. In the public imagination, it was something else entirely. It was a shrine to interruption, a city that had inhaled, opened its mouth to speak, and then never exhaled. Ferris wheel, empty schoolrooms, apartment blocks with curtains stiff as old paper, birch trees breaking through cracked asphalt, wolves on security cameras, moss on concrete. Silence where a whole city should still have been arguing with itself. And then came the rumors. Not the usual rumors. Not black dogs or shadow men or glowing children in windows. Those had floated around the exclusion zone for decades, traded among stalkers and guides and documentary crews who wanted a story worth telling on the flight home. These new reports were harder to dismiss because they originated in places that embarrassed easily. Field reports, drone footage, environmental surveys, a handful of uneasy internal memos that had no business being leaked and yet were. Bird populations healthy, rodent populations stable, pollinator activity unusually dense for several sectors, tree growth strong, deer, foxes, boar, even the occasional horse moving through the outskirts as though the old human geometry no longer concerned them. The numbers themselves were startling enough, but stranger still was the absence. No gross deformities, no visible lesions, no malformed limbs, no obvious abnormalities in tissue samples gathered at the edges of the zone, no signs of collapse in the local food webs, no disaster blooming inside the cells. Again and again, the field notes used the same careful phrase within expected natural variants. That phrase bothered people. It bothered Professor Lena Orloff enough that she agreed to leave Vienna in October and fly east for a site visit she did not want. And it bothered Dr. Alexei Markov enough that he volunteered to accompany her, which was how the two of them found themselves in a military transport van rolling north through wet gray weather under a sky the color of oxidized steel. "You're very quiet," Alexei said. Lena kept her eyes on the blurred tree line slipping past the windows. "I'm conserving my optimism." "That's your version of optimism?" "It's my version of professionalism." He smiled faintly. "You think the reports are falsified?" "I think," she said, "that when a place has been mythologized for 50 years, eventually even good data starts dressing itself up for attention." Alexei turned that over. He was younger than Lena by 12 years, though his face often looked older when he stopped smiling. Dark hair graying at the temples too soon, narrow shoulders, a careful way of sitting, as if he expected impact. He specialized in post-radiological ecology and had built a modest reputation by refusing sensational language in interviews, which meant he had one of the rarer modern scientific skills. He could say something alarming without sounding like he enjoyed it. "Or," he said, "the data is right, and we don't understand why." That is only marginally more comforting. The driver glanced at them in the rearview mirror and then looked away again. He had not spoken since collecting them. The soldiers at the checkpoint had examined their credentials with the same expression a priest might use while admitting someone into a crypt after dark. Not prohibitive, just quietly disapproving. Rain feathered the windshield. Old warning signs passed by, faded symbols, new fencing, watchtowers, empty guard huts. The road into the zone always felt, Lena thought, less like entering a place than entering a sentence someone had stopped halfway through. By late afternoon, they reached the outskirts of Pripyat. The van left them in front of a concrete building that had once been an administrative office and had since been reinforced, scrubbed, wired for modern instrumentation, and converted into a temporary field station. Its outer walls remained cracked and stained. The interior smelled of bleach, dust, batteries, damp wool, and old concrete. A generator throbbed somewhere beneath the floor. Banks of monitoring equipment glowed in clean rows that looked almost indecent in that setting. Their local liaison, a compact woman named Irina Haletska, met them at the door holding a tablet under one arm. "You are late," she said without hostility. "The weather," Alexei said. "The weather has been here longer than you." Lena liked her immediately. Irina led them through the station, sleeping rooms, sample storage, comms, decontamination area, backup power, kitchen. 2 technicians were already on site, both pale with the hushed overstimulation of people who had been in the zone too long. They introduced themselves, Maxim, drone operations, Talia, bioassay and tissue sampling, then retreated back into their work as though eye contact might cost them something. "You can begin tomorrow," Irina said. "Perimeter fauna survey first, then southern green corridors, then urban sectors as needed. We have mapped the densest return zones." "Any security concerns?" Lena asked. Irina hesitated only a fraction. "Not the kind you mean." Alexei noticed it too. "What kind do you mean?" Irina set the tablet down on a metal table. "You've both read the formal reports." "Yes," Lena said. "Then I will give you the informal one. Instruments function normally until they do not. Audio recorders pick up interference that is not environmental and not mechanical. Motion-triggered cameras occasionally fail to register moving subjects that are plainly visible in adjacent visual systems. People hear voices, usually at dusk, sometimes inside structures. The first week, everyone assumes suggestion. The second week, everyone stops saying what they hear out loud." A quiet settled in the room. Maxime looked up from his console but did not turn around. Alexei folded his arms. "You believe the site is haunted?" "I believe," said Irina, "that the site is occupied." Lena let out one dry breath through her nose. "Occupied by what?" "That," Irina said, "is why you are here." There were few things Lena disliked more than theatricality around field science. But she also knew the look in a room when people had begun sharing an experience and no longer needed to embellish it for each other. This was that look. Not excitement, not even fear, exactly. Fatigue, maybe. The strained patience of people trying to keep the world sorted into acceptable categories while it quietly rearranged itself behind their backs. That night, Lena unpacked in a room with peeling blue paint and a narrow cot. Through the grimy window, she could see the skeletons of apartment blocks and the dark reach of trees reclaiming courtyards. Pripyat at twilight was neither city nor forest. It was a treaty between them, uneasy and temporary. In the hall outside, Alexei knocked lightly on her doorframe. "Tea? Is that a euphemism for arguing about methodology?"
"Yes."
She joined him in the station kitchen. The electric kettle clicked softly. Someone long ago had taped a list of contamination protocols to the cabinet, and the paper had yellowed around the edges. Outside, evening drew itself down over the dead city in blue bands. "Let me guess," Lena said, taking the mug he offered. "You think we should entertain the possibility of collective perceptual drift?" "I think we should entertain the possibility that everyone here is under stress and pattern matching." "Good. Because if you had decided to become mystical in the last 4 hours, I would need a different roommate." Alexei leaned against the counter. "I do think the wildlife findings are real."
Suddenly,
And I think something about the region may have shifted, chemically, biologically, geophysically. Perhaps. She studied him over the steam. You're not saying what you mean. He looked out toward the window. I'm saying places store things. Not scientifically. No, but observably. War zones, disaster sites, old hospitals, battlefields. Even if you don't believe in haunting, there are locations where human perception changes. People become quieter, more alert, more suggestible. Their memory behaves differently. Maybe it's architecture, maybe acoustics, maybe expectation, maybe some environmental factor nobody has properly mapped. Lena sipped the tea. Too hot, bitter. And maybe the place is haunted. He gave her a tired smile. I didn't say that. You didn't need to. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that comes easiest between people who respect each other enough not to fill every gap. Then, from somewhere outside, far enough away to be uncertain, close enough to raise the skin along Lena's arms, came the sound of children laughing. Both of them went still. The laughter lasted only 2 or 3 seconds. Bright, distant, wrong. Alexei set his mug down first. Foxes, he said. No. Bird call distorted by the buildings. No. He met her eyes. Neither of them moved toward the window. The next morning, they began with the southern corridor, where the tree line pressed against the remains of parking lots and playgrounds. The weather had turned colder. Mist lay in ribbons between the trunks. Water dripped steadily from balconies overgrown with vines. Pripyat smelled alive in the unsettling way tombs sometimes do once roots have gotten in. Wet earth, leaf rot, mold, bark, mushrooms, the green insistence of systems that do not care what stood here before. Lena worked with concentration bordering on hostility. She cataloged pollen distribution, measured soil transfer, clipped samples, recorded insect density, checked bark damage, and noted avian activity with the relief of someone handling facts again. Facts had edges, ghost stories did not. The facts, unfortunately, were extraordinary. Sparrows, swallows, crows, a nesting pair of storks on a rusted transmission frame, boar tracks, fresh, deer scat, fox prints, a burst of butterflies in a clearing where the radiation reading remained measurable, but not catastrophic. Moss thick as velvet over an overturned bus stop bench. Birch, alder, pine, willow, all thriving where the built environment had surrendered just enough space. And normal. Disconcertingly normal. Alexei crouched beside a narrow drainage ditch examining reeds with a handheld scanner. Look at this. Lena joined him. Tiny frogs clung to the wet bank, their skin bright and clear. No tumors, no obvious developmental defects. He handed her the scanner. The readings danced and stabilized. They should not be this unremarkable, he said. Lena watched one frog leap into the reeds and vanish. There's a sentence. By noon, they had filled 2 cases with samples and 3 pages of observations that seemed to contradict half the disaster narratives built around the zone. Not that radiation had ceased to matter. It had not. Dosimeters still chirped in hot spots. Certain pockets remained dangerous. Safety rules remained rigid. But life had not returned in the broken, monstrous form the popular imagination preferred. It had returned with indifference, which was somehow less reassuring. On their way back through a residential block, Lena paused at the entrance to an apartment building. The facade leaned under the weight of trees. Windows stared blankly. A child's red shoe lay on its side near the steps, half buried in moss. Don't, Alexei said. She glanced at him. I wasn't going to. He pointed to his dosimeter. Not because of ghosts. They kept walking. A shape moved behind one of the fourth-floor windows. Both of them stopped. It had not been an animal. Too upright, too fast, pale at the edges, like a figure behind frosted glass. Lena shaded her eyes and stared up. The window remained empty. "What did you see?" Alexei asked. She did not answer immediately. A branch tapped somewhere above them. Wind moved through the leaves in a low rush. "Reflection," she said finally. He kept looking at the building. "There is no glass." "No," she said, "there isn't." That evening, while Maxime reviewed drone footage and Talia processed tissue samples, Lena and Alexei compared notes in the comms room. Irina stood with her arms folded, reading over their shoulders. "All right," Lena said. "Biological return is robust across the surveyed sectors. Morphology within expected range. Soil uptake complex, but not manifesting in visible population collapse. So either we're catching a deceptive calm phase, or ecological resilience has outpaced the mythology," Alexei said. Irina tapped a separate report on her tablet. "Now, compare with audio anomalies." Lena pinched the bridge of her nose. "Irina." "I know how that sounds. Read it anyway." Against her better judgment, Lena did. A catalog of timestamps, locations, recorder failures, cross-referenced witness accounts, repeated descriptions of hearing music where no source existed, footsteps above occupied floors in sealed buildings, snatches of conversations in empty corridors. One technician reported seeing a woman in a yellow coat standing in the street beyond the old supermarket. Thermal imaging showed nothing. Another heard knocking from inside an evacuated school and found, on entering, 23 desks arranged in perfect rows despite having been photographed overturned the day before. "It's absurd," Lena said, but more quietly than before. "Is it?" Alexei asked. "Yes." "And yet?" She hated that phrase. "And yet I am willing to investigate environmental causes before I accuse a contaminated city of becoming metaphysical." Irina gave a small shrug. Everyone begins there. That night, the strange sounds came earlier. At 1912, a burst of static washed through the station speakers, although no transmission had come in. At 1927, Talia reported hearing humming in the sample room and refused to go back alone. At 1941, all 3 exterior cameras facing east cut to snow for 6 seconds and returned showing the courtyard empty except for rain rippling in puddles. At 20:03, someone knocked on the front door, 3 sharp raps. Everyone in the station froze. Maxim looked at the camera feed. The porch was empty. No one spoke. 3 more knocks. Harder. Irina took the emergency flashlight from the wall and handed Lena a radiation meter as if the gesture itself might preserve normalcy. Alexei moved to the monitor and switched views. Porch, yard, street, fence line. Nothing. "Maybe branch strike," Talia whispered. "Branches do not wait for answers," Irina said. Another knock. Then, very distinctly, the sound of a child's voice from just beyond the door. "Please." The room changed. Lena felt it physically, like a pressure front. Every instinct she trusted rebelled at once. Open it. Because what if someone was there? What if a child had somehow wandered in? What if help was needed? Do not open it. Because there should not be a child here. Because every line of reasoning ended in impossibility. Because impossibility was standing on the porch using a little girl's voice. Alexei's face had gone pale. "Nobody opens that." No one argued. The voice came again, softer. "Please let us in." Then the porch camera flickered. For a fraction of a second, 5 figures appeared in the static. Adults and children, blurred, standing shoulder to shoulder. One of the children seemed to have her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Then the image snapped back, showing only the wet concrete and railings shining under the security light. Talia made a sound Lena had only ever heard from trauma patients when pain arrived ahead of their ability to manage it. Irina shut off the external speaker feed. The knocking did not return. No one slept well, or much. At dawn, Lena woke to the sensation of someone standing beside her bed. She opened her eyes and found the room empty, window gray with morning. Her heart was pounding hard enough to hurt. For a few seconds, she remained still, listening. From somewhere in the building came the sound of water dripping. Then a voice, not heard with the ears, but with that more terrible inward clarity of remembered speech. "You left us." She sat up so quickly the cot frame squealed. There was no one there. Breakfast was perfunctory, coffee, bread, fatigue. No one referred directly to the night except to confirm practicalities. Recorders on all routes, no solo excursions, continuous comms. Lena, who disliked conceding ground to the irrational, found herself checking door latches twice before they left. They entered central Pripyat just after 9. The city opened before them in long axes of ruined apartments, public buildings, broken pavement, and trees threading through all of it like veins reclaiming a limb. The amusement park loomed ahead in flashes between branches, the famous Ferris wheel, yellow gondolas rusting against the white sky. Even before they reached it, Lena sensed something had changed. Birdsong diminished, not ceased, not completely, but thinned as if the area ahead existed under a separate acoustic agreement. Their own footsteps seemed too loud. Their breaths showed in brief white threads. Alexei checked his meter. Normal. Irina did the same. Also normal. "Do you feel that?" Talia asked. No one answered, which was answer enough. They crossed the open space toward the amusement park and stopped. The Ferris wheel, inert for half a century, was moving. Not turning fast. Barely moving at all. A slow, deliberate rotation. One gondola creaking down, another rising. Metal complaining under ancient strain. Wind, Lena thought instantly. Then just as quickly, no wind. The trees around the plaza stood nearly still. Maxime lifted his drone controller with shaking hands. "I'm launching!" The drone rose, buzzed forward, and then dropped out of the air as if struck, smashing into cracked concrete 20 meters away. On the far side of the plaza, among the bumper cars and weeds, figures were appearing. They did not arrive with drama, they simply became visible, like images developing in solution. A woman with dark hair pinned back beneath a scarf, a man in a worker's coat, a teenage boy, 2 children holding hands, then more. Dozens. Standing amid the ruin with the stillness of people waiting for a procession to begin. Transparent was the wrong word. They were not transparent. They possessed shape, texture, clothing, faces, but each seemed lit from within by a pallid underwater light. Their edges wavered against the air. Talia stumbled backward, whispering something prayer-like. Lena heard herself say absurdly, "Hallucination does not usually synchronize across multiple observers." Alexei let out a strangled laugh. Useful note. The figures began to walk toward them, not fast, not with menace in the cinematic sense, but with purpose. More emerged from between the buildings, from the schoolyard, from the bus station road. Old men, women in dresses, boys in school uniforms, a firefighter blackened around the mouth and eyes, a nurse in white shoes, a municipal worker still carrying a clipboard. They came as one might approach officials after a long wait, not to attack, but to present a grievance too long ignored. Irina said very calmly, "Do not run." "Why?" Maxim asked. "Because they don't." The answer was somehow worse. The nearest figure stopped 10 paces away. an elderly woman with a lined face and a shopping bag hanging from one hand. She looked at Lena with such exhausted hatred that for a second Lena forgot all fear and felt only shame, though she did not know why. The woman opened her mouth. When she spoke, 100 voices came with hers. "Where are our names?" The sound hit them like pressure. Talia cried out and covered her ears. Maxim dropped to one knee. Even Alexei flinched as if struck. Lena forced herself to answer. "What?" The figures advanced one step, all together. "Where are our names?" they said again. The Ferris wheel turned overhead with a long, rusted groan. Alexei swallowed hard. "We don't understand." At that, movement rippled through the crowd like anger in grass. Voices broke loose, overlapping, different ages and timbres colliding. They measured the trees. They counted the wolves. They filmed our windows. They took our dust. They wrote of resilience. They wrote of recovery. And where are our names? Lena's scientific mind, even now, tried to organize this. Not random haunting, not simple replay, not a loop. They were responsive, intentional. They were not merely present. They were accusing. Irina took one cautious step forward. "Tell us what you want." The crowd stilled, faces turned toward her. One little boy near the front clutched a toy truck missing 2 wheels. A woman behind him had half her hair burned away on one side. None of them blinked. Then the old woman spoke alone. "You come for what grew after us. You speak of what survived us. You praise the return. But the city is full because we are still here." Her shopping bag twitched in her hand as though moved by underwater current. "We are not your background." Lena felt a deep, cold work into her spine. All at once she understood the shape of it, not fully, not rationally, but enough. Every report, every film crew, every survey about ecosystem rebound and wildlife return and contaminated forests becoming laboratories of resilience. The city had become a symbol so large it had flattened the people inside it. Their apartments, their objects, their hospitals, their schools, their evacuation, their interruption. The dead had become scenery. The lesson had replaced the lives. The ghosts were not angry because they were trapped. They were angry because they had been edited. Alexei seemed to reach the same conclusion a moment later. "They want to be recorded," he said. The crowd watched him. "Not the disaster," he continued, voice trembling. "Not only the contamination, the people. The actual people." The old woman looked at him with something that was not approval, but was less hostile than before. "Say it," she said. Alexei glanced at Lena. Lena's throat was dry. "We don't know your names." A shudder passed through the gathered dead. Somewhere behind them a woman began to sob. Not dramatically. Softly, the way someone sobs when they are too tired for performance. "Then learn," said the old woman. The temperature dropped sharply. Their breath thickened. The figures began to separate, leaving a narrow path through the center of the plaza leading toward the heart of the city. Irina stared down that path. "They want us to follow." Maxim found his voice. "Absolutely not." The crowd turned its collective attention to him. He went silent again. Alexei looked at Lena, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw naked fear without even the attempt at restraint. But beneath it, something steadier had taken hold. Obligation, maybe. "We came to investigate," he said. "That is not what we came for," Lena replied. "No," he said, "but it may be what we're for now." No one said yes. No one said no. Yet moments later they were moving. The path led them through avenues cracked by roots, past schools whose murals had faded to ghost pastel, past balconies furred with moss, past a swimming pool half full of black water reflecting the sky. The dead moved alongside them at a distance, shepherding rather than surrounding. Every now and then one would glance toward a building, and another would step from its doorway to join the procession. They came at last to the hospital complex. The building's concrete facade loomed over them with all the tenderness of a bunker. Broken windows stared down. Rust streaked the walls. Inside, corridors ran with wet shadow and the mineral smell of seepage. Their flashlight beams caught peeling paint, collapsed ceiling tiles, old signage, debris pushed into corners by time and drafts. Lena's dosimeter clicked harder here. Not panic fast, but enough to keep urgency alive. "Why here?" Talia whispered. A child's voice answered from ahead of them in the dark. "Because they brought them here first." Irina closed her eyes briefly. They followed the voices down a stairwell, into a lower records department whose doors had long ago warped and split. Cabinets lay toppled, paper moldered in drifts along the floor. Folders collapsed into paste. Decades of water damage had turned many labels illegible, yet some shelves remained upright, protected by angles of concrete and luck. There were still files here, thousands, maybe, admission ledgers, staff rosters, emergency transfer notes, names. Alexei exhaled in disbelief. My God. The ghosts had filled the room. Nurses, patients, orderlies, workers in respirator gear, civilians holding coats over their mouths. A firefighter stood near one cabinet with both hands burned black, his expression not furious now, but terrible in its expectation. Behind him were others, so many others, that the beam of Lena's flashlight seemed not to illuminate them so much as be absorbed into their waiting. The old woman stood at the doorway. "Find us," she said. For the next 6 hours they worked. Not because they wanted to stay underground in a haunted records room with rising radiation exposure and no idea what would happen if they failed. They worked because none of them could bear not to. Maxim photographed every intact page. Talia carefully separated mold-bound sheets with gloved fingers. Irina read names aloud in Ukrainian and Russian, and sometimes both, voice going rough with repetition. Alexei cross-indexed dates and addresses, building a relational net out of whatever fragments remained. Lena, who had spent her career quantifying the aftermath of invisible harm, found herself kneeling in wet paper and speaking people back into sequence. Halina Petrovna Boris, Serhiy Mikhailovich Koval, Yelena Artemyevna Doroshenko. The room changed each time a name was spoken. A face in the crowd would sharpen. A posture would ease. One figure, a boy no older than 9, smiled faintly when Irina found his surname attached to an apartment block and school assignment sheet. Then he turned and walked through the far wall, disappearing into the dark beyond as gently as mist lifting from water. Not all of them vanished, but enough did that the pattern became undeniable. The dead did not want revenge in the crude sense. They wanted reassembly, recognition, a restoration of personhood from the sediment of narrative and neglect. Lena had not cried at a funeral in 14 years, yet sometime around the 300th name, while reading from a water-stained pediatric registry, her vision blurred so badly she had to hand the page to Alexei. He took it without comment. Their shoulders touched as they knelt among the files. At one point, while Maxim documented a cabinet in the back corner, he froze and whispered, "Professor." Lena went to him. Inside the drawer lay a school evacuation list, remarkably intact, sealed between sheets of plastic from some long-forgotten preservation attempt. Names of students, birth dates, teacher assignment, residential sectors, scribbled notations marking who had boarded which bus. At the bottom of the page, in faded blue ink, someone had added a note by hand. Do not let them be forgotten because they were orderly. Lena stared at it until the letters doubled. The ghosts around them had gone silent. Alexei read over her shoulder. Who wrote that? No one answered. Near sunset, with batteries low and sample cases repurposed as document containers, they carried what they could back toward the station. The dead accompanied them only to the hospital entrance. There, the old woman waited one final time. You will tell it correctly, she said. Lena lifted her chin despite the tremor in it. Yes. You will not make us scenery. No. The old woman studied her, then Alexei, then the others. Then some of us may sleep. She looked not relieved, but tired in a way beyond tiredness. The kind that belongs to people who have been made to stand in line beyond history. Who are you? Alexei asked quietly. For the first time, something like personality touched her face. A worn, almost amused sadness. I sold bread, she said. I lived on Kurchatova Street. I hated cabbage. My husband whistled when he lied. My daughter wanted red shoes. That is who I am. Then she was gone. No flare of light. No cinematic dissolve. She simply ceased to occupy the place where she had been standing, and the doorway behind her became only a doorway again. The walk back to the field station felt longer than the journey out. Night settled in layers between the buildings. The city watched. Once, near the square, Lena saw children standing under a bus shelter. They did not approach. One lifted a hand in a gesture too ordinary to be frightening and too sad to bear, then lowered it again as she passed. Inside the station, they did not bother pretending the day could be processed in real time. They decontaminated, secured the files, ran backup scans, uploaded copies to 3 separate servers, and built a protected archive before anyone dared sit down. By 1:14, the workroom table was covered in names. Handwritten transcriptions, hospital admissions, municipal lists, school rosters, addresses, family clusters, fragments connected into lives, not complete, never complete, but enough to push against erasure. Talia, red-eyed and exhausted, said what all of them were thinking. No one will believe this part. Lena looked at the files. Then we tell the part they can verify so thoroughly that they have to believe the rest may have happened too. You're suggesting we publish ghosts? I'm suggesting, Lena said, that we publish people. Alexei sat across from her, elbows on knees, hands clasped so tightly the knuckles had blanched. The wildlife findings matter, he said softly. They do, but not like this, not without this. No, said Lena. Not without this. Outside, rain began again. At 2:03, the station speakers clicked with a burst of static. Everyone went still. Then, faintly, so faintly it might have been imagination if imagination had not been disqualified hours ago, came the sound of music drifting across the courtyard. A waltz, thin as radio memory. No voices, no knocking. Just music. Played for a little while and then gone. No one opened the door. In the days that followed, they continued the survey, but the work had changed. They still measured radiological distribution, cataloged fauna, documented ecological recovery. Yet now, every route passed through human geography first. Apartment sectors were mapped not merely by contamination gradient, but by residents known and unknown. Schools were no longer School Number 3 Ruin Cluster or Educational Structure East Sector in Lena's notes. They became places where children once learned handwriting, where teachers filed orderly lists before buses arrived, where lunch trays had been left stacked and unclaimed. The hauntings did not cease. They became more intelligible. In a stairwell, Alexei heard a man reciting his home address until it was written down. In the cinema, Talia found seat numbers scratched into dust and later matched them to a recovered attendance registry from a municipal event. Maxim, most skeptical at the start, wept openly when a little girl led him by successive glimpses. Red coat at one corner, then another, to a collapsed records annex containing neighborhood census pages no one knew had survived. The dead wanted cataloging, correlation, witness. Not because paperwork mattered more than mourning, but because records were the skeleton of remembrance. History could sentimentalize tragedy, weaponize it, turn it symbolic, drag it into argument. A roster, however, was stubborn. A roster said, here, this person, this age, this building, this family. It pushed back. 3 weeks later, Lena and Alexei left Pripyat with secured digital archives, physical document cases, soil and tissue samples, acoustic anomalies, thermal failures, and a professional burden neither had anticipated carrying for the rest of their lives. Before dawn on their final day, Lena stood alone outside the station and looked toward the apartment blocks silvered by weak light. The city seemed almost gentle then. Mist hanging low, trees breathing in the courtyards, a rook flapping from a rooftop crossbeam. Her meter was quiet. "You were right," Alexei said from behind her. She did not turn. About ghosts? About myth dressing for attention. A faint smile touched her mouth. "That's not the direction I expected you to go." He stepped beside her. The myth was wrong. Not because the place is less strange than people thought, because it's stranger in a more human way. They stood together in the cold. "Do you think they'll rest now?" he asked. Lena watched the blank windows. Some of them. And the others? She thought of the old woman with the shopping bag, the firefighter, the children, the nurse, the endless patient fury of those reduced to backdrop. "The others," she said, "will wait until we keep our word." The paper they published the next year caused uproar for reasons both expected and unexpected. The ecological findings alone were enough to ignite international debate. The recovery patterns around Pripyat challenged old assumptions, complicated newer ones, and forced an uncomfortable public reckoning with how disaster landscapes were narrated. Journalists wanted a clean angle. Nature rebounds. Nature does not rebound. Radiation is misunderstood. Radiation remains catastrophic. Humans are uniquely destructive. Humans are melodramatic about destruction. But the paper resisted simplification. It was scientifically dense, conservative in its claims, and impossible to turn into easy optimism. Attached to it, however, was a second publication. Not a supplement, not an appendix. A separate archive. The Pripyat Civilian and Worker Recovery Index, preliminary reconstruction of named residents, staff, and evacuees from surviving municipal and medical records. 43 pages at first, then hundreds as more institutions joined the effort. Schools, hospitals, transport records, housing assignments, family registries, witness testimony, surviving relatives, cross-border archives, volunteers, historians, linguists, clerks, students. An act of assembly too large for any single team, growing month by month because once it began, it became morally impossible to leave unfinished. Lena refused every interviewer who wanted to ask about haunted buildings. Alexei accepted one interview and said only this: "A city is not its cautionary symbolism. It is the sum of the people who cooked there, lied there, kissed there, worked there, worried there, raised children there, missed buses there, bought bread there. If you want to talk about Pripyat, begin with that." He became briefly famous for the quote. He hated it. The truth of what happened in 2034 was never formally admitted by any institution. No report included the phrase ghost encounter. No ministry endorsed the possibility that the dead had objected to their own abstraction. Yet the archive expanded. The names multiplied. Faces were recovered from photographs and matched to records. Apartment maps were rebuilt. School class lists were restored. Fire brigade assignments were annotated. Family trees reattached. A city, though still dead in one sense, began refusing erasure in another. And then, in late autumn of 2035, the messages began. Not to everyone. To Lena first. She was in Vienna, working late, when her office recorder, disconnected, powered down and stored in a drawer, clicked once and played back 2 seconds of sound. She froze and replayed it. Children laughing, bright, distant, this time not wrong. A week later, Alexei called her from Warsaw after opening a shipment of scanned municipal records. At the bottom of the top page, in the margin of a 1986 tenancy ledger no one remembered annotating, someone had written in blue ink, "Better." Nothing else. No handwriting match. No practical explanation. Lena framed the copy and hung it inside her office closet where no visitors could see. Years later, when the archive had become the largest named reconstruction project ever attempted for the region, Lena returned alone to Pripyat under official escort. She was older, slower in the knees, less interested in arguing with the boundaries of the world than she had once been. The city remained itself, green, ruined, occupied by weather and memory, trees taller, concrete softer at the edges, the Ferris wheel unmoving beneath a hard white sky. She walked to the old plaza and stood where the first crowd had gathered. Nothing appeared. No dead lining the pavement. No voices from the buildings. No little girl asking to be let in. For a moment, she felt disappointment sharp enough to surprise her. Then, from somewhere nearby, came the smell of fresh bread. Impossible. Warm yeast. Flour. Crust. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was no one in the square. Only the wind moving through the high branches and a single red shoe placed neatly on the cracked concrete near the curb, clean as if set down that morning. Lena approached it slowly. Beside the shoe lay a folded piece of paper. Inside, in a hand she did not know and could not possibly have seen before, were 4 lines. "We were here. We are not the lesson. Tell them we lived. Tell them we had names." Lena stood in the middle of the dead city, holding the note in both hands, while the sky pressed down over the roofs and the forests breathed through the bones of Pripyat. Then she nodded once, as though to someone standing just beyond sight. "I know," she said. And all around her, in the windows and stairwells and broken school corridors and moss-soft courtyards of the city that had waited too long to be spoken correctly, the silence changed. Not ended, changed. As if, somewhere beneath the concrete and roots and fallout and years, a choir that had been holding one impossible note for half a century had finally been allowed to breathe. Hey there. Thanks for listening to The Choir Under Pripyat. If you enjoyed this story, do me a quick favor. Hit subscribe, tap like, and share this with someone who loves dystopian sci-fi. It really helps the channel reach more listeners. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. If you're craving more dark, cinematic futures, stick around. There are more stories on the way. Until next time, stay curious and stay hard to categorize.